According to Greek mythology, it was Prometheus, the mighty Titan, who gave mankind the gift of fire and taught him how to use it. Having command of fire marked a turning point in human history. A development began which in the Stone Age led to groundbreaking inventions and achievements. They are the origins of modern civilization. Africa is regarded as the cradle of mankind. Located in the east of the continent is modern-day Tanzania. It was here, some 2 million years ago, that the fascinating history of civilization began. Its origins lie not far from the Ngorongoro crater in the Olduvai Gorge in the East African Rift Valley. Some 50 kilometers long, the canyon has yielded some of the oldest traces of human development. Indeed, the prehistoric finds unearthed here have made the Olduvai Gorge world famous. The discoveries were made possible by erosion, which over hundreds of thousands of years has exposed ancient layers of rock. They are like a window on the past. The Olduvai Gorge has long been a magnet for paleoarchaeologists from all over the world. This current expedition is being undertaken by scientists from Britain. The project is headed by Ignacio de la Torre, an archaeologist from London's renowned University College. Together with his team, he hopes to gain a better insight into the world of prehistoric human beings. De la Torre is treading in some huge footsteps. Many celebrated researchers have made finds in the Olduvai Gorge that have led to turning points in the study of mankind. Among the most famous of them was the discovery of Homo habilis. Homo habilis is the first representative of the species we call man. He was the first hominid, or early human, to use simple stone implements for cutting. The oldest of these stone flakes, as they are known, are around 2 million years old. But the emergence of his descendant, Homo erectus, marked a totally new phase in human development. Homo erectus invented the hand axe, a tool far superior to stone flakes. Countless specimens still lie buried in the earth of the Olduvai Gorge. They are proof that even early man was fairly intelligent. Creating a hand axe from a shapeless lump of stone took skill and imagination.
The first difference between tools of animals and tools of humans is that animals usually don't make those tools, they use them. Humans, however, they manufacture those tools. Plus, in this example of a hand axe, you can see that there is a clear shaping of a point, there is a mental template, there is an intention by humans to create this particular shape for a subsequent use. You rarely find this in the animal kingdom, apart from humans, of course.
The hand axe marks a quantum leap in the history of civilization. Researchers rank it even higher than the invention of the steam engine or the computer.
Hand axe is a very fascinating tool. It's found over many parts of the world over a very long period of time. The earliest examples of hand axes date to about 1.6, maybe even 1.7 million years ago. Made, let's say, by the earliest examples of Homo erectus. But we also find them over a period much longer than 1 million years. Even Neanderthals regularly produced hand axes, and they're spread over almost the entire Old World.
The Swiss Army knife of the Stone Age was a multifunctional tool. It could be used to scrape skins and pelts, crack bones, bore holes, remove bark, and dig up roots. Most of all, however, the sharp cutting edge could be used to remove the flesh from animal carcasses, something Homo erectus could not do with his teeth. Thanks to the hand axe, early man was able to supplement his vegetarian diet with more and more meat. This meant he was also consuming more valuable protein. The consequences of this first magical moment of the Stone Age were sweeping.
Besides muscle growth and many other effects, the increase in meat consumption also resulted in a marked enlargement of the brain, which of course made man capable of totally new achievements.
Over time, the high consumption of meat saw the brain of early man increase in size from 640 to 900 cubic centimeters. At the same time, his mental capacity also increased, slowly paving the way for the next major step towards civilization. It was triggered by lightning and meteorite strikes and volcanic eruptions, the natural forms of fire on Earth. Their enormous power terrified not only animals, but also early man. But at some time or other, a million years ago perhaps, man's curiosity prevailed over his fear of these life-threatening dangers. Homo erectus recognized the inestimable value of the flames and put them to use. Humans had mastered fire. This mastery changed everything. It catapulted human development into a totally new dimension. Early man learned how to preserve fire. The tamed flame brought light and warmth to the African night. It kept insects away and frightened off wild animals, which up to then had been Homo erectus's worst enemies. The remains of one of the oldest hearths made by humans are around 780,000 years old. Various features clearly distinguish them from places where fire occurred naturally. The arrangement of blackened stones and the remains of carbonized food like seeds and animal bones discovered nearby are all proof that Homo erectus had mastered the art of making fire. He was also the first hominid to roast his food over flames. This had the advantage of killing off any harmful germs. What's more, boiling or roasting made many types of food far easier to digest.
Well, I think that's clear. If you've ever done any camping and you're in the winter and your food is frozen, if you try to take a bite out of frozen meat, you will break your teeth off, right? It's not possible. And if you imagine living in a cold place like here, where we are in Northern Europe, you have to have a way of thawing your food. So that's one aspect. To be able to even eat it, you have to thaw it. The other question is, cooking gives you an advantage. It makes the food easier to digest, makes it possible for our body to process the calories and the nutrients much more effectively, and hence it's a requirement for life, but also improves our makes our physiology works much better on cooked food.
Cooked food also reduces the amount of energy needed for digestion, energy which is then available for the brain to utilize. Over several 100,000 years, its volume increased to 1,000 cubic centimeters, making it almost the same size as that of modern man. But hearths and campfires also served another important purpose. They developed into fixed meeting points for the community. They were probably the places where the first interpersonal bonds were forged, with gestures, facial expressions, and perhaps even with early forms of language.
We must assume that hearths and campfires were also social focal points. They were where people cooked, chatted and congregated. And they were possibly where language first developed. Perhaps people told stories, spoke about the day's events and exchanged experiences. And there's no doubt that their tales also gave birth to the first myths. I believe that the campfire, the hearth, was of central importance as the focal point of human life.
But despite his mastery of fire, mankind was still a long way from being able to generate it systematically. It was only about 40,000 years ago that humankind acquired techniques which enabled him to create a flame through various forms of friction. About 1 million years ago, Homo erectus left Africa. First of all, he populated the whole of Eurasia. Much later, his descendants also spread as far as Australia and North and South America. Around 600,000 years ago, Homo erectus reached Central Europe, which at the time was experiencing an interglacial period with average temperatures several degrees above present-day levels. He was probably lured by the prospect of good hunting. This is indicated by the sensational discovery in Schöningen, Germany, of spears dating back 300,000 years. They are believed to be the oldest weapons in human history. The site of the find is in Lower Saxony, not far from the former inner German border. Close by, a modern research center has been built to house the precious relics from the Paleolithic age. The spears found in Schöningen have radically changed our view of human evolution. Scientists had previously regarded the human descendant of Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, as rather underdeveloped, but the finds refute this. The spears bear testimony to the intelligence and skill of their creators, because the hunting weapons are technical masterpieces. They are made of elastic but robust pine or spruce wood. The center of gravity of each spear lies in the front third, which gives it far better flight characteristics. Each spear was sharpened not in the middle of the shaft, but on the edge, where the wood is particularly hard. Homo heidelbergensis knew exactly what was needed to produce a perfect hunting tool. This is also confirmed by experiments with exact reconstructions. Prehistoric spears could fly up to 70 meters. Every year, researchers discover relics that are more than 300,000 years old. In Schöningen, human civilization is acquiring distinct contours for the first time. Scientists have also found large numbers of animal bones in the layer of soil where the spears were discovered, close to the shore of an ancient lake. The remains provide an insight into the former biodiversity of the region, but they also reveal a lot more. The bones enable scientists to determine which animals Stone Age man preferred to hunt. Homo heidelbergensis also had his sights set on forest elephants, rhinoceroses, bears and saber-toothed tigers. But wild horses were his favorite quarry. So far, researchers have unearthed more than 10,000 horse bones, a huge volume which indicates that in those days, Lower Saxony was home to vast numbers of wild horses. Because of the quantity of bones discovered there, archaeologists estimate that the hunting forays of Homo heidelbergensis in Schöningen yielded at least 2 tons of meat. Marks on the bones indicate that the animals were cut up on the spot. They were caused by meat being removed with a cutting implement made of stone. The wild horses probably came to the lake regularly to drink. The hunters knew this and lay in wait for them. Good weapons alone, however, were no guarantee of hunting success. That also depended on how well the hunters worked together, which in turn meant that they had to communicate with one another. Thanks to Schöningen, we know that Homo heidelbergensis did this successfully. His capabilities were far closer to those of modern man than was long suspected.
That has to be a coordinated group activity that requires a lot of planning, a lot of communication, and certainly terms for things like horse, spear, kill, meat, eat, cook. And much of that could be communicated with gesture, but independent of whether they're words or gestures or expressions, facial expressions, somehow it was possible to communicate these specific ideas. That in and of itself is symbolism, and it was possible to talk about now, the past, as well as the future.
Stone Age man was not only a talented communicator, but also a skillful house builder. In northern Thuringia in Germany, archaeologists have discovered the remains of a small encampment with round huts, tools, and hearths. The find puts life in the Paleolithic age in a totally different light.
The image we have of Stone Age man living primarily in caves or in rock shelters known as abris stems mainly from the fact that layers of finds tens of thousands of years old have been best preserved there. In open country, of course, such layers and their relics were destroyed by erosion. So, although we know that people in the Stone Age did use caves and abris, we must assume that they also built huts on open areas and lived in these extremely simple dwellings.
This also applies to Neanderthal man. Descended from Homo heidelbergensis, he stepped onto the world stage around 300,000 years ago and spread throughout many countries of modern-day Europe and the Middle East. Genetically, Neanderthal man was far superior to his ancestor. Indeed, his genome differs from that of modern-day man by a mere 0.2%. In 1989, researchers in Israel made a sensational discovery. They found a Neanderthal skull containing a very special bone, the hyoid or tongue bone, which anchors the tongue at the back of the mouth. Anatomically, the tongue bone is the decisive prerequisite for one of mankind's most important gifts, the ability to speak. But speech is only possible through the interplay between anatomy, mental capacity, and the existence of a special gene, FOXP2, better known as the language gene. Discovery of the hyoid bone in Neanderthal man suggests that he already had command of a simple form of language.
In my opinion, speech was important, but I don't think there was speech in the sense of a Goethe or Shakespeare. I think it was much more, let's say, a more rudimentary form of verbal communication combined with gestures and other kinds of communication through eye contact or other ways of expressing things, as well as a physical body contact. By touching people, you can also convey a lot of information. So they had well-developed communication, they had a form of language, probably not the same kind of verbal language that we have today.
How Neanderthal man spoke, or what he said, remains a mystery. But perhaps there is a link between his cult of the dead and his language. Researchers know that Neanderthal man created graves and held rituals. The first known burial of a human being took place in France. About 50 years old at the time of his death, the old man from La Chapelle was interred alone. The hand axe found near the skeleton was perhaps a burial object, but it might also have been linked to a ritual in which the dead person's flesh was separated from his bones. Located not far from La Chapelle in the French town of La Ferracie is the biggest burial site ever found from the time of the Neanderthals. The site is also regarded as the oldest cemetery in the history of mankind. The Neanderthals interred 7 people in it around 50,000 years ago. For researchers, the site is clear proof that early humans didn't just lay the dead in a hole in the ground. The finds show that he took the trouble to build a tomb to bury the deceased with dignity. In La Ferracie, a man, a woman and 5 children were buried. The male skeleton indicates a powerful build, but the jaw is particularly informative. Researchers have found evidence of abscesses and damaged teeth. The inflammation could have led to his death. Lying on top of his resting place was a lump of rock that had been worked, a kind of gravestone perhaps. Even before Homo sapiens, it seems, the Neanderthals had developed a notion of the hereafter.
If a child dies, or a mother or a father, certainly Neanderthals had personal emotions toward them, and in the cases where the skeleton is completely articulated in a pit, then covered up, I think it's a deliberate burial. It's a point that's debated, but my personal opinion is that Neanderthals had a concept of the afterlife, even if it was a bit perhaps not as complicated as those that we have today. I think there's good archaeological evidence that there was some sort of, let's say, proto-religious beliefs about what happens when a person dies. And I think Neanderthals had these kinds of ideas.
While the Neanderthals were populating large areas of Europe, in East Africa, some 200,000 years ago, another type of hominid was emerging, Homo sapiens. Anatomically, Homo sapiens is modern man. The word sapiens means wise. Even more than his ancestors, this modern man is driven by the desire to set out for new horizons. The future belongs to him, thanks to his inventiveness and his insatiable curiosity. Homo sapiens is tall and slim, with long arms and legs. Because of his physical features, he is extremely sensitive to cold, a drawback he compensates for with unique achievements. He is an evolutionary success. Around 100,000 years ago, Homo sapiens left his African homeland, presumably, like his ancestors, in search of a new habitat. Over tens of thousands of years, he then spread throughout the globe. Modern man had arrived to stay forever.
Ultimately, in his creativity, Homo sapiens was unsurpassed. He also succeeded in adapting to the natural conditions better than all previous hominids. The cold periods in Europe, for example, were life-threatening, but Homo sapiens was able to cope with his environment, and he was incredibly creative.
It was only around 40,000 years ago, during the last ice age of all times, that Homo sapiens came to Europe. Whereas the Neanderthals suffered greatly from the extreme cold, Homo sapiens adapted successfully to the challenge and emerged as victor of evolution. He developed strategies which enabled him to survive in an inhospitable environment. And he invented something completely new: art. Using sophisticated techniques, the artists of the Ice Age painted their drawings on cave walls. They obtained their paint materials from charcoal, ochre, or plant substances. No humans are depicted. Only the various hand negatives, like personal signatures, bear testimony to a human presence. In the depths of caves, wall paintings of magical effect were created. The motifs recur time and again. Large wild animals are depicted: giant deer, woolly rhinoceroses, and in particular, wild horses. Homo sapiens was able to portray such animals so realistically because he had personal experience of them. They were the creatures he hunted, cut up, and roasted over a fire. Perhaps these drawings were a form of gratitude for the gifts of nature, messages to the animals which Homo sapiens revered like deities.
This really is world art, which basically portrays the environment in which early man lived. The animals he hunted, which he encountered in nature, were depicted in motion and sometimes in perspective and with such dynamism and richness of colour that we really have to talk in terms of world art. And as a rule, these works were created in the rear areas of caves, so they could not have been painted in daylight. Imagine going into the rear part of a cave with a torch. This flickering light from the torch makes the painting seem almost like a film strip, and the animals that are depicted almost seem animate, and there can in fact only have been ritual and cultic reasons behind this.
Some researchers are convinced that a cave like this with its wall paintings must have been a spiritual place. They believe caves served as sites for initiation ceremonies where, as with primitive peoples today, young men were ritually prepared for their first participation in a hunt. But we can only guess at the exact purpose of such caves. The famous Lion Man sculpture most certainly served cultic purposes. It's around 40,000 years old. The Venus of Hohlefels, with her rather ample proportions, is of similar age. The figurine is the earliest known depiction of a human being. The two objects are regarded as the oldest sculptures in human history. But Homo sapiens also immortalized horses, aquatic birds, and mammoths in his works of art. The sculptures tell of the prehistoric animal world in Germany. They all stem from caves on the Swabian Alp, the citadel of Ice Age art. The famous Venus of Willendorf is only about 10,000 years younger. It's thought that she represents a fertility symbol. During the last Ice Age, it seems Venus figures became fashionable. They've been found all over Europe. Perhaps they were intended as reverence to maternal deities, which are responsible for growth and reproduction. But it was not only art that humans devised in the extreme climate phase. They also invented the sewing needle, a major technological breakthrough and one of the most important weapons in the struggle against cold. The sewing needle enabled humans to seal their clothing better against the weather. It also enabled leather and pelts to be worked far more easily. When a new ice age loomed some 25,000 years ago, humans were perfectly equipped to cope with it. The brilliant invention of the sewing needle also enabled them to advance into regions which the climate had previously made inaccessible. Homo sapiens thus overcame a natural barrier. This was attributable solely to his inventiveness and the urge to optimize his living conditions. At first glance, the sewing needle might seem insignificant, but it is still one of the great achievements of the Stone Age.
For instance, with Ice Age modern humans, we frequently find needles. I've dug a lot of Neanderthal sites, and we never find needles with holes in them. So it seems like, for instance, Neanderthals might have covered themselves with tanned hides to keep warm, but modern humans sewed their clothing much more like we know, for instance, with Eskimos. And there's no question that having high-quality sewed clothing makes life a lot easier when you're living in a cold place.
Around 20,000 years ago, Homo sapiens came up with another brilliant invention, the spear thrower, or atlatl. The end of the spear was attached to a hook connected to a wooden grip. Ice Age man used an atlatl for hunting. It enabled him to kill large and fast animals from a safe distance. Tests have shown that spears hurled with an atlatl could cover distances of up to 180 meters.
Once you've mastered the use of an atlatl, first of all, the speed of the spear is totally different. An atlatl also improves accuracy and increases the spear's penetrating power. The throwing arm, together with the atlatl, acts as a lever, enabling greater distances to be achieved, which is particularly important for hunting.
The last ice age came to an end 12,000 years ago. The sun's power increased noticeably, and the sheets of ice melted. The icy planet was on the verge of a global spring awakening. The golden era of an interglacial period dawned. Back then, a revolution occurred in the Fertile Crescent, which changed the world forever. In present-day Anatolia, Gobekli Tepe was built, the first monumental structure in the history of mankind. Made of stone, the place is a religious sanctuary. A digital technique enables a three-dimensional model to be computed from photographs. It shows the huge dimensions of the complex. Its construction must have been a massive challenge. An undertaking of this nature would have been inconceivable without planning, specialist craftsmen, and efficient logistics. Most astonishing of all, however, is the fact that Gobekli Tepe was built by wandering hunter-gatherers, so it must have been a hunter's sanctuary. This is also indicated by the high T-columns. They have no architectural function, but are merely decorative pillars adorned with animal reliefs.
Gobekli Tepe is a fabulous site because the thing about it is it's right at the switch between agricultural societies and the many, many, many tens, hundreds, even millions of years of hunter-gatherer existence. And right at this time, when just agriculture is at its very beginning, we can see a situation where large numbers of people are coming together, building enormous monuments with T-shaped pillars that weighed many, many tons. You couldn't possibly do it without a huge workforce with a shared goal and a shared ideological system. And that's something we don't have in all the many, many millennia that go before. So it's an incredibly important site.
Researchers assume that the hunters and gatherers came together at Gobekli Tepe to celebrate major rituals, with roast meat and presumably, as finds have indicated, even with beer. Religion and celebration have been inseparably linked ever since the Stone Age. But ensuring that the many guests were looked after meant treading new paths. And that is precisely what happened. The region around Gobekli Tepe is one of the places where Homo sapiens first domesticated plants, engaged in farming, and became sedentary.
What is so exciting about Gobekli Tepe is the likelihood that religiously motivated festivals marked the start of this development. Before these larger groups came together on a permanent basis, they'd already shared rituals and festivals together. Indeed, it was only as a result of this that larger settlements emerged later.
So it was through celebration that sedentariness began. 12,000 years ago, it was tantamount to a revolution because it changed mankind more than any other transition. After millions of years of roaming the world as a nomadic hunter-gatherer, man placed his entire existence on a totally new footing. In doing so, Homo sapiens took civilization a step further. He learned to build fixed dwellings, since farming meant remaining permanently in the same place. It was only now that the art of pottery also became widespread. A society based on the division of labor emerged. People learned to specialize. The Neolithic revolution simply changed everything. The domestication of corn played a key role in the biggest upheaval in the history of mankind. In Saxony-Anhalt, scientists are exploring the fascinating question of what steps Stone Age man took to influence the quality and yield of the types of grain he planted. A comparison of domesticated barley with natural wild barley shows that the early farmers made specific selections and only planted the seeds from ears which a mutation had made particularly stable. They also looked for ears that bore a particularly high number of seeds. Natural wild barley is 2-row. In other words, each ear has 2 rows of kernels.
A further mutation in a single gene transforms this 2-row into a 6-row characteristic. So, theoretically, 3 times more kernels develop on one ear, resulting in 3 times the yield. So if a stable ear with 3 times as many kernels was found in a field of wild barley, it didn't take a lot of intelligence for a person to say, that's the variation I'd like to work with.
This indicates that the farmers of the Stone Age took a specific approach to agriculture in order to increase the quality and yield of their crops. This approach has remained unchanged right through to the present day, but it was developed 12,000 years ago in southeastern Anatolia. The Neolithic revolution took place separately in many parts of the world, but the term must not be taken literally.
It is wrong to use the term Neolithic revolution in the sense of a sudden upheaval. It was a comprehensive process over tens of thousands of years in man's engagement with nature, in his accumulation of knowledge of wild animals and wild plants and many similar things. But if we talk about the effect of man becoming sedentary, of him breeding livestock and growing plants and leading a rural life, which, after all, characterizes our life today, then this effect was indeed revolutionary.
This effect is also reflected in the development of prehistoric settlements. 9,500 years ago, the first major settlement in world history was built at Chatal Huyuk, 300 kilometers west of Gobekli Tepe. In its heyday, Chatal Huyuk had as many as 2,500 inhabitants. Chatal Huyuk had no streets or squares. Outdoor life took place on the rooftops. Society in Chatal Huyuk was egalitarian. The settlement had neither palaces nor temples, nor were there any market squares or workshops. Each household was self-sustaining. From keeping livestock to making tools, its inhabitants did everything independently. But the people of Chatal Huyuk also had to cope with the typical problems of civilization, like the removal of refuse and excrement. By and large, though, they must have been happy with their living conditions. After all, the settlement was inhabited for 2,000 years. People didn't just live in their single-room houses, they also celebrated ritual festivals there. Large wall paintings of hunting scenes bear testimony to this. They were probably intended to recall initiation rites or cultic hunts. The dead were also remembered. They were buried directly beneath the floor of a dwelling, safe and secure in the family circle. From today's perspective, the Stone Age world of Chatal Huyuk seems alien, puzzling, and remote. Researchers see things quite differently. The development of Neolithic settlements like Chatal Huyuk laid the foundations of our modern world.
You could say that in a certain way we are still Neolithic. We are sedentary. We live in villages or in towns or large cities. We go to the supermarket to buy the food we need, food which others produce for us, because we ourselves have assumed a specific role in our community, in our society. Ultimately, that is also the basis of Neolithic life. Obviously, a great deal has been added, but the foundations were laid thousands of years ago.
Just how the Neolithic revolution came from Anatolia to Europe is a question researchers have long focused on. Paleogenetics is still a young science. It involves studying genetic material from prehistoric skeletons in order to determine the relationship between individuals or large groups. The migratory movements of prehistoric times can also be reconstructed genetically. In a complex procedure, DNA samples are taken from ancient bones. If the DNA is intact, in a second step, it is sequenced. With this method, paleogeneticists have obtained clear data from the Stone Age. They make a decisive contribution to answering the question of when and how the Neolithic revolution came to Europe.
We found that around 7,500 years ago, a major cultural change took place in Europe, man's transition from hunter-gatherer to farmer. It was long speculated as to whether this was indeed a cultural change. Did local hunters simply get the idea of turning to agriculture and domesticating animals, or was it a question of immigration, of people coming to Europe with their agriculture and their domesticated animals? In recent years, paleogenetics has been able to show quite clearly that immigration really did take place, that people came to Europe from Anatolia. Within just a few centuries, they'd almost completely displaced the local population. They brought agriculture and domesticated animals to Europe. They settled and spread. Basically, they laid the foundations of modern-day civilization.
As paleogenetic analyses now show, settlement of the European continent took place in several migratory waves. The first people from Anatolia came to Europe and spread around 40,000 years ago, long before the farmers began arriving. They were still hunter-gatherers and lived just like the European hunter-gatherers they encountered. This only changed with the migratory wave of 7,500 years ago. Back then, two totally different cultures collided. Farmers from Anatolia came face to face with European hunters, but we have no idea whether the various encounters were of a peaceful or violent nature. What we do know is that a merging of the two cultural groups took place, one in which the migrants from Anatolia prevailed over the European hunters. By the end of the Neolithic period, 70% of the people in Central Europe were descended from farmers. Thus, in Europe too, the future belonged to the immigrant rural culture.
Time and again, immigration was accompanied by innovation, arable farming, livestock breeding, pasture farming, the wheel, carts, and domesticated animals like horses, which were highly important for future developments, metallurgy in the form of bronze and iron, and it all came via trade networks, via migration. So without this migration, this mobility, it would have been impossible for civilization in Europe to have developed the way it did.
The last major invention of the Stone Age was smelting. One of the world's oldest copper mines is located in Bulgaria. The galleries, which were shut down a long time ago, mark the dawn of a new era, the age of metallurgy.
Smelting plays a central role in the history of mankind. Basically, we're talking about obtaining metal from rock. Smelting represents the shift from a purely physical world to a chemical one. Beforehand, it had only been possible to change the shape of material. Now, through smelting, man was able to give it a totally different form.
The most important prerequisite for smelting is fire with a temperature of at least 1100 degrees. Stone Age man achieved this with the help of blowpipes. Copper was the first metal to be worked by humans. This meant crushing the ore and melting out the metal contained in it. It took hours of blowing to keep the fire at the necessary temperature. Only when the copper could be removed from the ore was the smelting process finished. Experiments with Stone Age methods underline how, at first, it must have been difficult to obtain copper. But through trial and error, Stone Age man finally acquired the expertise needed for producing the precious metal. Even today, copper is still one of the world's most sought-after raw materials. From obtaining copper to casting the molten metal is just a small step. Smiths soon mastered the technique. The new technology brought an end to the Stone Age, which gave way to the Metal Age. Then, humans discovered gold.
When gold is around, everyone wants to have it. And we see that in all societies. There have to be rules governing who has access to gold, how gold is produced, distributed, and taken out of circulation. Often it's taken out of circulation in the context of burials, where we frequently find gold, and it's a way of honoring the people or respecting the people, often in a position of power. When they die, they're buried with these extremely valuable materials. We see that over and over again in many different contexts.
The treasure of Varna in Bulgaria is the most spectacular gold find ever made. Dating back to the 5th millennium BC, it is unique in containing more than 3,000 objects made of pure gold. The gold was discovered in a necropolis in the northeast of the country. The magnificent burial gifts were intended to underline the status and power of the dead in the hereafter. The tomb containing a male skeleton is regarded as a sensation. The luxurious furnishings underline how metallurgy changed society, creating rich and poor and specialists.
Almost every aspect of society as we know it around us is characterized by metal tools. We couldn't possibly do any of the things we do without controlling the production of metal. And as you can also imagine, it's very clear that you have a very sophisticated division of labor. Not everyone knows how to make metal tools. So any society where, for instance, iron or bronze is being produced or gold is worked, you have specialists for these activities. And that specialization is something that didn't exist in that form in earlier societies and forms a basis for complex societies with very complex economic systems. Concentrations of wealth and power go along with this.
It was the age of advanced civilizations. In the 4th century BC, the first metropolis in world history, Uruk, was built in Mesopotamia in present-day Iraq. Temples and palaces, craftsmen's districts, market squares and barracks were spread over an area of 5.5 square kilometers. It's believed that up to 50,000 people lived here. It was in Uruk that humans first experimented with urban life. It was in this megacity too that the first script was developed. The world's first epic poem was also written in Uruk, the Epic of Gilgamesh. A sophisticated commercial and administrative system brought the city prosperity and power. Splendid buildings and luxurious goods steadily widened the gap between its elite and the majority of the inhabitants. In Uruk, social inequality experienced a new dimension. whether as a political center, an economic power, or as a sacred place, whether as the birthplace of bureaucracy, grand architecture, or script, or as a center of art and literature, Uruk set standards which henceforth applied to every advanced civilization.
When we look at the process of human civilization and the various areas of human life and their development, the irrepressible will of man to create and to push back boundaries really stands out everywhere. And no matter how limits are set by nature, by living conditions, or by other hostile communities, the will to overcome them is, in my opinion, the decisive mainspring of human endeavor and thus of the path towards civilization.
Soon, other impressive cities with outstanding advanced civilizations emerged in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and in other countries. Thus, the history of mankind experienced new turning points time again, with minor and major magical moments. With Homo sapiens, human development gathered speed. He came up with brilliant inventions at shorter and shorter intervals. The tireless motor of mankind's achievements is man himself. He set out to assume lordship over the earth.